right, ladies and gentlemen. So you guys have got your questions in. I'm just going to start, Gerard, with a nice and easy one. Should be nice and easy for you to answer. Will you oppose foreign ownership of large agricultural land? That's from Anonymous.
Yes, I will. That's already one of our policies is to basically ban foreign ownership of infrastructure and agricultural land and residential housing. So, you know, I mean, the worst thing about it is too, it's the tax rates. When the foreign, actually, it doesn't, you know, I was just saying, I'll go a little bit off tangent on this one. I looked up Gina Reinhardt back in 2017, I think, bought out the Kidman properties with the Chinese. And I know Twiggy Forrest, and I know they're from the farming sector as well, but I would much rather see even Australian billionaires, rather than buying up agricultural land, pushing Australian farmers off the farm, they should actually be taking that iron ore that they're making a lot of money from, the profits from that iron ore, and actually looking at building steel factories. They really want to give back. Because the big thing that when we went offshore in the 1980s, one of the arguments for taking a manufacturing offshore was that we couldn't compete with Asia. They had lower wages, right? But here's the thing now, is that a lot of steel factories and a lot of manufacturing is completely automated. So all we have to do, even if we can't build the machines that do the automation ourselves, we do still have the raw material, and if we would actually start burning more coal and even uranium, we could actually, bring a lot of this manufacturing back onshore. Now, because it's automated, we wouldn't necessarily bring a lot of jobs back onshore with it. We'd bring some, but we would get the uplift in wealth. So instead of selling iron ore at $100 a tonne, we could be selling steel billet at $500 a tonne. I don't know how many of you have heard of the Iron Boomerang project, where they're talking about, that's actually an inefficient project. What you'd be doing is shipping your iron ore around to Darwin, your coal around to Darwin, and then just railway uranium up from Olympic Dam into a steel factory at Darwin and stick the steel on, the ship at Darwin, which is, literally directly under the east coast of China, and take it straight up through, the South China Sea that way. I mean, we're going to turn that into a policy because, it's things like that where we really need to, it's not enough just to own our agricultural land and, sell raw materials or whatever. We have to start, adding more value to the products we make.
Lovely. All right. Does People First have a policy on vaccine injuries, excess deaths and fertility? What level of executive authority was used in pushing the mandates through?
Okay, good question. So we have, our policies are that pharmaceutical companies have to be liable for the products that they sell. It goes without saying. We want to abolish the no jab, no play through childcare centres. We also want to remove all mandates. So there's no mandates, no job mandates or anything like that. That's not on. So they're their three major ones, I think, off the top of my head. We do have others around that. But look, needless to say, there needs to be proper quality assurance in all of this testing. I mean, I've actually got a clip from Aaron Shree that I need to post that he presented to Congress a week or two ago. But as he so rightly pointed out, Big Pharma is literally the only private Big Pharma is the only private sector that isn't accountable for its own product. And that was a result of the changes brought in by Reagan, whereby vaccines were basically they were indemnified from their own injuries. And that was, he was pointing out in the 80s, apparently there are a lot of injuries from vaccines and that was just going to send them broke. So they were given indemnity. And of course, the worst thing about that too is now they're calling things that aren't even vaccines to get that indemnity. So, look, the answer is yes, we do have policies for that. If you'd said to me 6 years ago I was going to be talking like this, I wouldn't have believed it, but, we all went through COVID and we saw the lies. And I think, even with the climate change, I think a lot of people, I've spoken to a lot of people over the years who have said that COVID woke them up to climate change. Beforehand, they gave the government, before COVID, they'd give the government the benefit of the doubt because, the thermodynamics in the atmosphere isn't something that most people understand, right? They're going to, just believe what the government tells them. But after COVID, the problem with the COVID stuff was vaccine injury was a vaccine injury. And we saw the government just continually lie. That's one of the other things we are doing. We're going to split the TGA out between the actual people who approve any medical product and then the people that review vaccine injuries, because there was clearly an inherent conflict of interest that the TGA would be reviewing their own stuff-ups. They had, there was just, they were regulatory captured by themselves in the sense that, they weren't going to admit they made a mistake. So that was another one of our policies as well. But if you hop on www.peoplefirstparty.au, we do have our policies on there. And if you go down to health, you'll see those policies. We actually want to expand our health policy out a bit. So I'm currently working with the GP because we do want to, and this is one of those things, when we're talking about and selling policy, the reality is this, that you will win more votes if you were to deal with the gap when you go and visit a doctor than talking about the World Health Organisation. One of our policies is to leave the World Health Organisation as well. But I'm actually, I'll be honest, I don't like that policy. I think it's a real tragedy that we have to leave it. Because when I grew up as a kid, I used to read a lot of National Geographics and you'd see, organisations like the World Health Organisation go out to Africa and places and remove cholera out of the water and things like that. And I wish we could have a body that would go around helping people in the third world. But the sad fact of the matter is that organisation has become corrupted by Big Pharma and people associated with Big Pharma to drive their own interests. And I will just on that one also point out that I do not encourage Australia to leave the United Nations General Assembly. So this is different to the agencies. I'm talking about the General Assembly where they go to New York. Now, Donald Trump gave a speech there, was it at the end of September, where he just ripped into renewables. And remember they turned his microphone off and they turned the elevators off? Because I believe that you cannot make decisions out in the car park. You have to be in the boardroom and make decisions there. And I'm not going to stand here as someone who wants to represent you and then get into Parliament and then turn around and say, well, I'm not going to go to the table and lobby for your interests. So you need to be careful what you wish for here. Some of these parties seem to think we should get out of everything. Well, if you don't, as I said before, the world's run by those who turn up. If you don't turn up, then how are you going to get your point of view across? And that's one of our strengths, is that we want to be able to influence the decision makers. Okay, and I actually, by the way, I believe in the original Charter of the United Nations when it was set up after World War II to stop conflict between countries. And actually, and if you read the original Charter of the United Nations, it's actually very, it's a strong supporter of a nation's sovereignty, ironically enough. And yet again, it's the global bureaucrats who are undermining it, right? And it's interesting, this week there's a UN, I'm not sure what her title is, but she's pushing back on a lot of the transgender stuff, right, in her role as in the UN. Now, what's interesting is that the Albanese government is now trying to undermine her and remove her from her role. And it just goes to show that ultimately all of these things are driven by the local governments. We get good people in the government at the local end, and we send good ambassadors to the UN. We're going to do what Trump did, in September, and stand up there and say we think renewables is crap. I forget he laid into a few other things as well, because the UN should be the forum where we promote nations' sovereignty, right? And by all means, we do want to have dialogue with other countries, because you know what? One of these days, China might look at that iron ore up in the north part of WA and go, I don't know why we bother paying for that. It'd be cheaper just to take an aircraft carrier down there, land there and take control of it. Often, people think that if China come and I don't want to get too bogged down on this line of thinking, but, that somehow they've got to get through Asia to get here. Captain Cook didn't go through Asia to get here, did he? He just, or Der Hartog, they just sailed right around. So, yeah, something to think about.
All right. as seen with other countries and their governments adopting laws on speech, and I guess I'd point to most recently the false terrorism threat that happened, I think, last year that resulted in the hate crimes, hate speech, those sorts of things. Do you see that targeting grassroots, podcasts, independent media, stuff like, and yourself?
Absolutely. I hate those hate crime laws. They were basically whipped up federally on the back of this fake Dural. I don't know if you followed that, the fake Dural caravan bomb plot in New South Wales earlier this year, where they were making it was going to be a terrorist plot. And I called it out at the time. I didn't know for sure it was a terrorist plot, a fake terrorist plot, but I was pretty sure it was. And they used these laws to ram in some hate crime bills federally. I'll say ram. They didn't ram them in. They amended them to change them from intent to, I think the word they used was either reckless or careless. And of course, that went from intent. You had to prove that the person deliberately intended to offend someone to if you're just being careless. Now, I don't think anyone's been charged under those hate crime bills yet federally, but there's similar laws in Victoria as well. Now, a bloke called Damien Richardson, who was a freedom fighter throughout the COVID, debacle, whatever you want to call it, throughout the COVID period, he, the age referred to him as a Nazi or something, and he mocked it. He was at a function like this down in Victoria, and he mocked it. And he did a fake Heil Hitler thing, salute, whatever you call it. And he's been charged with a hate crime in Victoria. Now, in the court case, the judge made a number of points. A, that he quelled any anti-Semitism, Semitism, that's it, in the room. So he talked about it, how much pride he had in his grandfathers who fought in the war fighting Nazis. So he was offended that basically he was called a Nazi when his own grandfathers fought Nazis, and he was very proud of the fact that his grandfather fought Nazis. But because he did this salute mockingly, he's been charged by the Victorian police, and then the judge basically but had to, because the letter, had to follow the letter of the law, prosecuted in the end. But basically, if you read his judgment, or I think it was her judgment, I'm not sure, just about said but, and then it's yet again, you're right. Like, in terms of, is this going to shut down free speech? Absolutely, because it's going to be used by people to basically silence. Anyone can take offence at anything if you try hard enough, right? And you can say something that, sometimes, I know, I've spoken to people and they'll tell me, years later that they were offended at something I did and I had no idea that I even offended them. So, not good. And yet again, what is the government doing policing hate speech? There's bigger fish to fry than running around, trying to lock people up for, and I want to be clear about this. There's a difference between hate speech and inciting violence. Inciting violence, yeah, fair enough, right? If you're actually out there telling people to go and burn down, Parliament House or burn down, that's different, right? But where it's, hate speech, I want to also reiterate this, I encourage respectful debate, right? So where you're intimidating people and you're getting up in their face and threatening them and all of that's intimidation, right? That's not on either. But where you're literally just having a debate, you might be putting forward an argument, and it might be an unpleasant argument, but the fact is you've got to listen to it whether you like it or not. And I'll just finish on this. There was an interesting article in The Australian yesterday that was comparing the Nazis who did a rally. Suddenly they were given a permit last week at the front of New South Wales Parliament House, and I think it was the Mocha in The Australian. I'm not sure, it was in The Australian. I was reading it on the plane over. And they were comparing the views of the Nazis to Bob Carr, who actually started the Friends of Israel organisation with Bob Hawke in 1977. But they both had the same opinion, that they thought the Jewish lobby was too strong in Australia. But, yet again, it's a classic example of how two organised, Bob Carr and the Nazis, two different political, ends of the spectrum can have the same view. So it's yet again, it's just interesting.
All right, so this is almost conspiracy sort of stuff going on here. So this is two different questions, two different people, but I'll put them in the same one. Is Gerard involved in any secret organisations, for example, the Freemasons? But on a more serious note, this is another one. Who or whom is actually running our country?
Yeah, okay. Well, you'll be pleased to know I'm not a Freemason. Actually, I'm English and Irish descent. My maternal grandmother's English and my paternal grandfather's English, and then my others are all Irish. So one of my great-great-great-grandfathers came out from Ireland in 1824 on the boat. And then we had people come. I've got ancestors who also came out with the potato famine in the 1850s. So, no, I'm not a Freemason. I do know someone who was a Freemason. I used to dump him all the time, pay out on him all the time. But I went to a ball one night and someone asked me that because I had this particular type of suit on, and I hate penguin suits, right? So that was another thing I hated about the Liberal Party. There was people in the Liberal Party who actually got a kick out of getting dressed up in a suit on a Saturday night, and they'd go to these balls in their little penguin suits and thought they'd made it, right? And I couldn't stand that type of stuff. I'd much be rather sitting in a pub at a comedy show or just down the back of a pub, instead of King G's and, just a T-shirt and thongs, dumping shit on my mates and then dumping shit on me. That was my idea of a good time. So, no, not a Freemason. I'm not actually part of any organisation, really, other than... so I joined the Liberal Party in my early 30s in Queensland for a couple of years. I wasn't active. Then I joined the Liberal Party when I moved to New South Wales for about 6 years. Had 2 years out when we came back to Queensland, and then joined again when my wife went back to work. I had a bit of time off. And that's about it. I've been involved with the school P&F, and then younger, varying sporting clubs, and that's about it. Yeah. But then who runs the country? Well, look, I mean, how long's a piece of string? Well, if I had to give an answer, the bureaucrats run the country, and the ministers, the executive, take their extremely influenced by the bureaucrats. Many of them we've got a policy to ban international travel for bureaucrats, unless it's approved by Parliament. It needs to be completely transparent. Not that excludes diplomats. Obviously, we need our diplomats in various countries because we have people travel. If you lose your passport, you need embassies around the world. But if I had to say, it's obviously the bureaucrats, and then probably what I would call the most powerful bureaucrats who don't get enough scrutiny are the intelligence agencies. So I've always pushed back on this idea that WEF is as powerful as what's made it out to be. They're an influential body for sure, and they have some crazy ideas, but I can assure you that CIA or the Mossad or ASIO do not pick up the phone in the morning and call Klaus Schwab and ask which country we're going to invade today, right? So I look at basically the Bank of International Settlements, the central banks with the intelligence agencies, I would say, are the two most powerful organisations both in the world and within the countries, including Australia.
All right, so he's not at Bohemian Grove, guys. All right, so here's a more serious one. So what moves have you made to consolidate with One Nation? Why didn't it work out? Is there some vote sharing plan that can be sorted?
Yeah, sure. Just on that Bohemian Grove comment, I'll be honest. Now, if I was offered a trip to go to the World Economic Forum, I would go to the World Economic Forum, and I'll tell you why. Because it's held in Switzerland in January, and I haven't been snowboarding in a long time, and I would go. Okay, and I've always said that. I said if someone offered me a free trip, I probably wouldn't if I was a politician. I never took a trip overseas when I was a politician. But if I was in a business role, And my boss, my employer said to me, "Do you want to, we got these tickets to the World Economic Forum, it's in Switzerland in January. Do you want to go?" I'd be like, "Yeah, 2 straight, 2 rides." I've actually went when I was overseas for 7 years. Actually, in 1 year I went down from London on a top deck trip, and I actually had a week in Switzerland skiing over Christmas. We went to the James Bond, The Spy Who Loved Me. I love that opening scene in The Spy Who Loved Me. I actually think that is the best action scene ever, because it's authentic, right? It's not CGI, and it's literally skis, and then that guy that skis over the cliff and opens up the parachute, and it's got the Union Jack, and it says, "Nobody does it better." It's just Carly Simon. That is just such a great opening scene. So, and the reason why I say that is, not all these people that are involved in the bureaucracy or whatever are lying awake at night plotting to rule the world. It's generally just like people who took the vaccine throughout COVID, took it to keep their jobs. A lot of people, they get given these jobs, they've got a mortgage or whatever, and they don't necessarily like. I mean, I had a lot of whistleblowers in the bureaucracy give me data throughout the time I was there, and just back to the Leppington Triangle. You might have been remembered Labor tried to beat us up over when I was in the Liberal Party over we paid too much money for Leppington Triangle, which was 30 million. So Michael McCormack, when he was Infrastructure Minister, as part of the government, paid $30 million for 30 acres of land in Western Sydney. Now, this was land critical to the construction of Western Sydney Airport. And Penny Wong walked into the RAT committee. She never comes in the RAT committee one day through estimates, and made out that somehow this land was only worth $3 million, and that they'd paid this farmer, who was a donor to the party, $30 million. Now, I knew straight away, being from the farm, that basically 30 acres, which an acre is what, off the top of my head, I think it was 4,200 square metres, there is no way you were going to buy 30 acres of land for $3 million. That's literally 1 acre for $100,000. In Sydney, on the last bit of flat land in Western Sydney next to it, what was going to soon become a very big industrial area. I quickly just searched property sales in that area, and 1 acre of land was going for $1 million. So basically 30 acres, $30 million. And given that was industrial property, if you can get 30 contiguous acres for $30 million, that was a bargain. And I started pressing on that because I knew, just through accounting standards and all that, and valuations, this was crap. And Labor got a lot of mileage out of that because the Liberal Party, being the Liberal Party, were just too weak and insipid to stand up for themselves. But long story short, I pushed back. Anyway, I got off, the next sitting week I came to Canberra, I got off the plane in Canberra, and there was a bloke sitting in the airport waiting for me. He had a beanie on, he had the collar turned up, and he said, "Here's a stick, can you, full of information." And so, long story short, it turned out the bloke who gave me this information had his house raided by ASIO on instructions of this Labor tip-off. He had done nothing wrong. He was strip-searched in front of his family. And this is some of the rubbish that goes on over these lies, right? So, and the reason why I'm telling you this is that, and I've had TGA whistleblowers come to me. I had a very high-level TGA whistleblower come to me, and funnily enough, we went to the same school in Toowoomba. And his wife went to university with my sister. So we got to know each other quite well. And, he knew, he didn't realise it, but he sort of knew, he came to realise this thing wasn't safe. And he ended up he moved back to Brisbane and ended up working in a vaccine injury clinic. But I guess my point is that not everyone who works in the bureaucracy, when I said before it was the most powerful, they're not everyone in these organisations, they're journeymen, like all of us, and, they sometimes put in these positions, but they're not necessarily evil. It's just the way things work out. But back to One Nation. So we used to have a good relationship with One Nation. Over the hate crimes, I called them out because they didn't turn up. I felt that was hypocritical. But look, I think that, back to the minor party situation, we should merge. But we need to merge into a new organisation, a completely fresh political party that has a standalone, what you call secretariat and state executive. So the problem I have with One Nation at the moment is basically in its corporate governance. We don't know who the executive, the federal executive state One Nation are. So tonight, for example, we've had everyone stand up here. We know who Jody is. We know who's who in the zoo, right? We don't know who's who in the zoo with One Nation. They have a history of basically losing money, failing to disclose aeroplanes, failing to disclose pubs. They've been caught on camera, and I played it to a couple of people today, whereby James Ashby was caught planning on how to basically, and they'll deny it, he even says in that footage, if I'm asked this, I'll deny it, so he will deny it, how to actually grift the taxpayers and grift their own candidates, right? So that whole corporate structure, this is why we need a new party whereby the executive comes from you, the people. Right, so we're not going in there as anyone, there's no baggage. It's entirely new entity with an entirely new brand. Call it Reform Australia if you want to, don't care what you call it. And everyone's got to be pre-selected. So, for example, when Warwick Stacey, the senator from New South Wales, got up with One Nation in the federal election, he stood down after 2 months. Pauline went and appointed her own staffer from Queensland into the New South Wales Senate position. Now, I felt that was a slap in the face to the New South Wales One Nation members. By the way, a lot of New South Wales One Nation members wouldn't agree with me because they wouldn't know that they should have had a vote, right? Or they should have been entitled to nominate themselves. But if you want to have a proper, genuine grassroots movement, you've got to do things properly. And I had people say to me, they're angry with me because I'm attacking One Nation. And I said, well, that's interesting. You weren't angry with me when I attacked the Liberal Party over the vaccines, right? Either you believe in what you believe in or you don't. I believe in grassroots democracy and I believe in transparency. I believe in giving people a say and I believe in you doing this for the love of your country. So I'm over here. This trip this weekend will cost me $2,000 out of my own pocket. I'm paying for it myself. I'm not taking the costs out of the party. I'm not getting paid to be the president of the party. I'm doing this in a volunteering role, and I'm hopefully, if I make enough money on my gold stocks, I can do it for the next 3 to 6 years. Well, I'm serious. I've got 3 young children who I still have to. I miss my daughters. She has been going to play, her practice for theatre every Friday afternoon for all years. So this weekend was the weekend she had put a theatre on, and she's very arty. So I'm going to miss that. But you have to be putting the people first, okay? And if I'm drawing a salary or if I'm going on a 2 weeks, so yet again, CPAC is the right-wing equivalent version of the WEF, right? For all intensive purposes. You can't sit there and bag out the lefties going overseas to a WEF conference and then skip 2 weeks of Parliament to go over to a CPAC conference in the States to tell us, and the people in the States at CPAC. There was no telling them how bad Albanese is. What's the point, right? We know he's bad. You need to be in Parliament holding them to account from being bad and turning up to vote. And so, yet again, if you're going to elect people, they've got to go to estimates. They've got to turn up in the chamber when they have to be there, and you've got to have proper corporate governance. We do need to merge, by the way, if we want to, splitting the vote, splitting all these resources, it's inefficient, right? And we do need to merge, but we need to do it properly. And we're not going to drop, I'm not going to just roll over and turn a blind eye to stuff. I didn't do it in the Liberal Party and, I got booted out of that and I'm glad I did it. I don't have any regrets about what happened to me because I know I did the right thing, but we owe it to the people to do the right thing.
Yeah, there's certainly, I think, 33-ish% of people didn't vote for a major party? Or Yeah, cool. So plenty of vote there to be consolidated. All right, so what is the current members' numbers and what's the minimum required per year to have a political party continue?
So we're up to about 3,200 members, might be closer to 3,300. So we need 1,500 members to be a registered political party federally. We have got 1,500. I did that first thing because I don't know when they're going to pull it on me. Now that I'm no longer a sitting member, we will be audited at some point. So we will need to give them 1,500 names of people on the electoral roll. So I was asked earlier tonight, can you be a member of the other party? You can be technically members of the other party. But if you are ever, and we'll put out an email when we do finally send the 1,500 in, but if you ever get a call from the AEC one day saying which political party you're in, make sure you say people first. But look, when we get audited, we'll let everyone know we're being audited, and that if you get a call from the AEC. Now, what they do is the ministers, being the deviates they are from the major parties, have, even though the law says you need 1,500 members, they have made it so that when the AEC does the testing, they take a sample of 60 people out of the 1,650 names you give them, and if 9 of them say they're not a member of the party, then you're thrown out. You become unregistered. So, like I said, we're up to 3,200, 3,300 at the moment. That approach is wrong, right? Because, some of these people don't even, if they don't answer their phone or get back to the AEC, they'll be deemed as not counting, right? So they'll become one of the 9. So they're making it, yet again, very hard for us to stay in the party. But we'll cross that second question. That was it? Yeah. Oh, and then at the state level, you need 500 for Victoria. We're hoping to have that Victoria registered next year. New South Wales needed 750. We were slightly below 750, but my problem with New South Wales was you have to give them the names and they go on a public register. And I think embarrassing people. I spoke to someone earlier tonight whose son didn't want to come because he was in a particular role. That had he been seen could have been held against him, right? The last thing you want to do, people shouldn't have to disclose if they're a part of a political party, but it's a classic example of how, by forcing these people to disclose their names, if you go and then Google them when they're looking for a job, and you see, look, they're part of People First, some right-wing crazy anti-vax party, we won't employ that person, so... New South Wales is 750, South Australia was 250, but we just didn't have time to register so soon after the election. What's WA, does anyone know? 500? Right, so we need to get busy. So we need to be, the next election's 2029, so we need to get to 500 by 2029. So we're up to over 300 here, I believe. Yeah. So we need to be that will be one of the KPIs for the division over here is let's get to 500 plus members. Because we definitely want to run here in 2029 for sure. And then we haven't gone to the Northern Territory and Tasmania yet. We're just working on the 5 mainland states.
Okay. This one's a pretty common question. Why are some companies not paying tax in Australia? And if they paid their fair share, deficits could be minimised?
Yes, that's correct. The reason why some companies don't pay tax here, there's lots of reasons. Remember, you do pay tax on profit, not revenue. So I do get annoyed when they report revenue with no basis and not necessarily profit. Now, there's a lot of things that can go between the top line and the bottom line, and you really do need to see the set of accounts. But I'll give you a couple of examples of companies that aren't bad that pay no tax. So Santos doesn't pay a lot of tax here, right? Income tax, right? I've had shares in Beach Petroleum years ago. It never made any money. It was always going to make money, but it never quite made money. So someone like Santos, which is a completely Australian-owned company, cannot shift profits offshore. If it's losing money here, it's because it's spending a heap of money on exploration for oil in Australia. Right, so that is not a bad company. That, by the way, Santos stands for South Australian Northern Territory Oil Search. So it's like Woodside. It's a great Australian company, and I want to be very clear about this. I cannot stand when I see the lefties bash mining companies for not paying enough tax. Now, there may be an argument that the royalty rate, 5% on when iron ore was hitting $200 a tonne, you might have a fair argument to say above $200 or above 150, you might put it up to 10%. But our mining companies pay an enormous amount of tax here in Australia. But then you will have other companies like Pfizer and Facebook and Google and all sorts of other, there'll be like IKEA, like car dealerships, lots and lots of, when we shut down General Motors, for example, no one ever really asked the question, how much in interest, royalties and rent did we pay offshore, Right, well, I can tell you how much in interest, royalties and rent General Motors paid offshore. It was enough to make sure they never made a profit here. Because had they made a profit here, they would have paid 30 cents in the dollar. Right, most of our treaties with the states on withholding taxes, with tax treaties, they have next to no withholding tax on interest, royalties and rents paid offshore. So why would you make $100 here and you're going to pay $30 tax? You just do a book entry where you shift, you pay $100 in royalties offshore and you bring your profit to zero and you pay no company tax here. Basically loopholes is the reason why I say companies pay tax and others don't. But when it comes to multinationals, the biggest loophole of all is that the rate of tax on profits sent offshore is much, much lower than the rate of tax on profits kept onshore. So if you make money here in Australia, you pay 30 cents company tax. If you shift your profits offshore, depending on tax treaty, you'll pay between 0 and 15 cents in the dollar. So if we take our good friends Pfizer in 2022, they made $1.4 billion in sales here. They shifted $1 billion offshore in royalties. So they got a $1 billion tax deduction, which saved them $300 million in company tax by shifting that profit offshore. Now, when Ireland received that $1 billion, they have a 12.5 cent company tax rate, so they collected $125 million in company tax for nothing more than just setting up a head office in Ireland and doing a couple of intercompany book entries. And I used to do these book entries at Westfield, so it's not hard to do. So what we need to do is basically lift the rate of withholding tax on profits sent offshore to places like Ireland, Singapore and the Netherlands. But it's not just Pfizer. When I was advertising on Facebook in the last general election, I was paying Meta Ireland was billing us. So even though I was an Australian politician and I was advertising to Australian constituents, they were, our tax office has allowed Meta to say that the source of the revenue was in Ireland. That's completely ridiculous. Now their argument is, oh well, our servers sit in Ireland, so that's where the information's being exchanged. But wait a minute, who builds the transmission lines, underwater sea cables from Australia to Ireland? It wasn't Meta, was it? It would have been Telecom back in the day, when it was owned by the government, right? So yet again, we've got to crack down on these things. One area where we do have problems is on the offshore gas. So offshore gas is not taxed the same as onshore gas. So I think there's been a couple of gas fields discovered up the road a bit just recently. That gas, there'll be a royalty on that gas applied by the Western Australian government. If it's an offshore gas field, with the exception of Woodside and the initial Northwest Shelf, where they did pay a 10% royalty, Hawke and Keating brought in a petroleum resource tax in the late 80s. And it was really poorly designed, and it was meant that the offshore gas companies could uplift their expenses. And they've only just started paying some petroleum resource rent tax on that now. What you should do there, we're going to get rid of the petroleum resource rent tax and just charge a flat 10% royalty on offshore gas sales. Chevron got caught out a few years ago charging their subsidiary here in Australia at 9% interest when they were only borrowing at 2% interest. That was straight out rort, so that was through intercompany transfer pricing. Yet again, when Pfizer shifted that $1 billion offshore, their operating profit ratio here in Australia was only 7%. I compared that to their worldwide operating profit from the New York Stock Exchange. It was 35%. So they're clearly grifting us. I did another ruling post this week whereby in South Australia, the judge ruled we have this section in the Tax Act that basically says foreigners don't have to pay capital gains tax on non-real assets. There's another section in the Tax Act that says foreign banks don't have to pay, or foreign lenders don't have to pay withholding tax on the interest we pay them. So there's a lot of rules in the Tax Act, and yours truly is one of the few people in politics that actually knows where they are, and we need to abolish them.
All right, so housing. So there's two questions here I'll combine as one. So and I'm not sure if you're aware of this specific example, but at a time of record housing shortages, why is a fully equipped federal federally owned 500-bed facility sitting unused in Bullsbrook. And I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but to continue on with that, please articulate how to reduce the cost of housing for our next generation without collapsing the value of the assets of current owners, if that's possible.
Okay, so, well, it's not just, what is it, Bullingwing? Bullsbrook. Yeah, we've got the same thing in Queensland as well. We've got I'm not sure if it's 500-bed facility in Pinkenba that wasn't being used as well. And I did a few posts on that when I was a senator, the stupidity of them sitting there empty. The answer is, well, I can only say government stupidity and unwillingness to actually, use those facilities. I mean, there's no excuse for it. So that's the answer to that question. How do we solve the housing crisis without crashing house prices? That's a good one, actually. Well, we can do that. I think the best way to do that is actually increase take-home pay, so cut taxes. What we really need to do is lift, and the way, look, this requires a whole hour-long stump speech, but we need to bring back an infrastructure bank. We need to bring back capital. I touched on some of this yesterday, but we need to bring back capital control so we're not letting younger people borrow so much money in the first place. This is how we got into this mess. That genie's out of the bottle. So what we really need to do is just basically flatline house prices and allow wages to catch up. And this is going to probably take about 15 years. If we're going to be honest about this, if not even 20 years. I mean, because this is a problem that's been 40 years in the making. House prices are high in Australia for a number of reasons. They shouldn't be, because we have vast, tracts of land, and we still, I know it's a relatively low population compared to the rest of the world. I mean, there's other countries, they have much less land mass and a much greater population, and house prices aren't anywhere near as expensive as what they are here. But they originally got out of hand because in 1985, Paul Keating lifted capital controls. What that meant was that he said to the banks, we aren't going to tell you how much money, where you can borrow your money from. You can borrow your money from anyone you want, and you can lend it to anyone you want. Okay, so what that meant was that foreign debt held by private banks went from $8 billion in 1985 to $800 billion by 2008. That drove house prices up from 4 to 5 times earnings to 12 to 13 times earnings. It meant that two parents had to go back to work, and the rate down from just, I think, a tick under 2 or around 2 to what it is, 1.5 today. It was created in 1992. There was a GFC in 2008. Now, a lot of retirees at that time had borrowed money against their paper investments. They'd paid their house off, but they'd actually borrowed money because they were encouraged to by reckless financial planners to borrow money against their investments. So take out margin loans against paper assets. These paper assets crashed, so people were forced to sell. Retirees were being forced to sell their houses to pay off their debts from the the bad investment decisions that they were sort of goaded into. So in order to stop, so this was when the foreign debt levels had hit $800,000. So to stop the house prices from crashing then, basically Kevin Rudd allowed foreign students to buy houses. Now, of course, foreign students didn't necessarily buy them, but their parents did. So that then created the stuff to, foreign students in the university sector. So basically for a long, and this is where, yet again, I'll have a crack at Pauline Hanson here, because she, a lot of people around saying, she was always been right about immigration. She told us this 30 years ago. When she first raised immigration in her maiden speech in 1996, the immigration rate in Australia was less than 100,000, and the biggest immigrants to the country are from New Zealand and England, or Great Britain, right? We didn't have a problem with immigration in 1996. Immigration became a problem in 2007, 2008 with the GFC, because we started to use it to prop up housing prices because of bad economic decisions made in the 1980s. So if we want to unravel immigration and put a cap on housing, we need to unravel those decisions in the 1980s. Now, the other decision that was made in 1985 that was incredibly destructive to our economy was that John Button basically removed tariffs on our manufacturing industry. So at the same time, we decided to turn around and take a whole heap of debt, bring a whole heap of debt into the country. We then turned around and basically, over a period of time, didn't happen straight away, we reduced our productivity capacity, because rather than getting our children into a trade and starting to be productive, they started going off to university. So a bloke by the name of John Dawkins, and I found out last night that Ben Dawkins was his nephew, but small world that it is. He introduced the Dawkins Plan in 1990, which basically funded students or our children to go to university. Now, the problem with that was then you started universities, thought, well, here's a free handout here, because we'll create all these degrees, and it wasn't being supply driven from the industry, in the sense that they weren't teeing up, okay, we need X number of accountants, X number of lawyers, or whatever. It was just like there was just degrees, and they're still doing it today. I was having a conversation about a particular profession that has just blown up, out of nowhere in the last decade. And we didn't used to have this particular profession, but we do now, and then it's created another industry. So we've gone, and this year's 40 years since the Button Plan, and that's significant. And this has actually been happening for the last probably 10 years, but it's sort of reached its zenith now, whereby that generation of people where you had more people on the tools is now retiring, and the younger generations, there's more people that have been the pen pushers or gone to university and got brainwashed, right? So they're not replacing the people who've been on the tools. So this is why we need immigration, to come in and fill up that skill shortage. But the reason why that matters is that as we've allowed manufacturing to go offshore, we've allowed that uplift from manufacturing to go offshore as well. So our earnings have dropped, because we aren't really we made a lot of money out of the minerals boom, but we've kind of squandered that on NDIS and a lot of other things as well. We haven't reinvested that profit as we should have done. So this is a long answer, I know. So long story short, it's a number of things. We've got to increase our skill set. We've got to change the tax settings. So we are going to get rid of the 50% CGT discount. My view is if you earn $100,000, we'll bring back indexation. If you earn $100,000, I don't care how you make it, you should pay the same rate of tax as someone else who made $100,000. This idea that we're taxing people who earn passive income at half the rate of people who get out of bed, put their nose to the grindstone through active income, has got to stop, right? Because what it is now is we've got this real, and I was just talking to a couple of people tonight actually, who have spent the last 5 years, I think they saved $40,000, and of course house prices have risen by $200,000, right? So if you are someone that is earning $100,000 today, you'll pay 25 grand tax. You'll need 50 grand to live on. If you're lucky, you might save $25,000. If you're making, if you've got an investment and your house is going up by $100,000, you're paying half the rate of tax. Your investment's growing faster than what someone who's trying to actively save. And we have to fix this problem, because, and this is why, yet again, when you've got the Liberal Party, complaining, and I had this issue with them when I was in the Liberal Party. There's certain retirees that basically want to have tax concessions given to them on the income they earn once they retire, that make it much more difficult for younger people to catch up. Because if they're not, I don't care how old you are. As I said, if you're earning $100,000, you should pay the same rate of tax as everyone else. And I'll look slightly off topic. I've had people say, "Can we have a discount for pensioners for people first?" And I said, "Well, why should it just be pensioners and then not young people? Because young people have got a mortgage in front of them, right?" So, yet again, we've all got different needs. When you get older, you've got health needs. When you're younger, you've got to pay off your HECS. When you're in middle age, you've got to pay for this, your mortgage off, and you've got to pay for your kids. All your kids' bills. So we've got to be honest about the tax concessions that have gone to property over the years haven't helped the situation either. So we've got to get rid of them as well. But we do need to also, capital controls. Albanese's recent 5% deposit scheme, and where the government's going to back that up, is complete and utter stupidity. right? Because if you only need a 5% deposit and you save 50 grand, that basically means you can borrow a house for buy a house for $1 million and borrow $950,000. If before, when we used to have proper capital controls in this country and house deposits as a form of capital control, it was 20% you needed for a deposit. The most you could have paid for your house is $250,000. So yet again, when Keating lifted capital controls, not only did we go and borrow a whole heap of money, we've encouraged our younger generation to take on way too much debt. And of course, it was good for the first generation because the people that were selling houses were making a fortune, and we made a lot of money, capital gains tax, the federal government, through this artificial inflation of assets. But it's now the party's over, and it's our younger generation waking up and are going to have to pay it. And if we don't do something about it, we'll be governed by a Greens Teal coalition in the next 10 to 15 years.
All right, I need a couple more questions. So where were we? I do not consent to having water having added fluoride to it, and then I have to spend a lot of money having it removed. What are your thoughts on this?
I don't know enough about fluoride to say. I mean, I grew up drinking fluorinated water and I'm still alive today. I must admit I have a friend who's an industrial chemist, and I raised this with him actually not that long ago, and he said, look, he didn't rate fluoride at all. But yet again, I need people to be able to, you need the evidence, you need a victim, and you need to demonstrate the stuff's not safe. So I'm not saying it is safe. It's one of those issues I don't know enough about, and it, to try and, I think in Queensland some councils have dropped fluoride as it is now. But I mean, look, if you're concerned about it, go and buy your bottled water or whatever. But yeah, that's about it.
I got one here written because they didn't get a QR code from Sally. What are your primary industry policies? So no wool processing in WA. All the wool is buried and sent overseas to Indonesia, thanks to Kevin Rudd. So what are your primary industry policies, I guess, surrounding wool?
Is that around just wool processing or just in general? Yeah. 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 Sure. Yeah, okay. Well, look, just so that you know, I grew up in the sheep station as well. On my CV, when I graduated from university, they said work experience, and I said training Kelpie dogs. And we've got a Kelpie today, and I have wonderful memories of growing up on our sheep station. And I'll be forever grateful to my parents for bringing me up on a farm. I often, my wife will vouch for this, I often dream of going back onto the sheep station with a Kelpie stud and bringing back the merinos. Because, I just love, I nearly was that far away from doing a wool classing course. I should have taken a year off and did it actually. I've done it. But, so our agricultural policy is obviously no foreign investment. Also, obviously, our infrastructure projects will look at building a lot more dams for the purposes of irrigation. We also want to remove the cap on collective bargaining that limits farmers from forming cooperatives. So under the ACCC Act, I forget the act. I should know it. It's in our page, but there's a section of it that restricts farmers from collective bargaining for more than, if they've got a combined turnover of $10 million. Now, on that Woolworths Coles inquiry, they were forcing horticulturalists basically to sign NDAs to not disclose their contracts. So our horticulturalists and our flower producers, we need to protect them. We need to protect our dairy farmers by allowing them to collective bargain with Coles and Woolworths. And if it means we pay a little bit extra for milk, then so be it. It's a price worth paying. in terms of that wool one, that's interesting because we were looking at bringing back a wool processing facility in Tambo. There was a bloke, the Tambo mayor, Andrew McIntyre, who was going to bring back a wool scour, but it's going to involve hundreds of millions of dollars in costs, and I don't think it went ahead. But I don't know enough to know about adding value. I like the idea. I will say this yet again: we need to, if we obviously we're going to struggle with China because I would imagine that adding value to wool is still quite a manual process. So we're going to obviously have to compete in other ways. Well, that's the other policy we've got. We do want to get, so in this particular case, this I think would help, even though it's not directly agricultural related, is we've got a policy to abolish payroll tax, so that at least if we employed people here, and I dare say if you wanted to do this, you're going to end up paying more than $1 million in wages because you're going to need the economies of scale to make it effective. We've got a policy to abolish payroll tax, and then obviously if you're building more power stations, so yet again, and I'm a big fan of nuclear because, or coal, because you can basically produce energy, if you've got, using coal or uranium virtually, I won't say for free, but, very, very cheaply, that would make us very competitive. So they would be two policies that would help as well. But look, obviously things like land management, things like fencing, protecting farmers' rights when it comes to guns, very strong about that. I grew up, on a farm with guns. I realise how important guns are to farmers. Anything like the native title and all these, I'm not sure how it impacts farmers over here. I've got a feeling it probably impacts in a bad way, like most things do. So anywhere where we can streamline government regulation. I mean, when my brother bought another property about 10 years ago, we've got tree clearing laws in Queensland that are completely absurd. And my brother had to work out if he was in the blue zone or white zone. And he had to apply to two departments, the Department of Environment Department and Department of Natural Resources, and they gave him a different answer over the farm, whether it was white or blue. So then he had to go and get a consultant to work out, to deal with the two departments to work out the classification of the land. So yet again, wherever, and I feel like I'm missing some stuff here, but obviously all the climate change policies that are going to work against our farmers. We don't want renewables on farmland. We don't want renewables at all. Look, I'll qualify on our property in Western Queensland. We've had solar panels out there on our bores since the early 1990s, right? So because obviously when you've got a 150,000 acre property, you're not going to run a transmission line down to your local bore. You're going to use solar panels, right? Because it's much cheaper to use solar panels. So when I say I don't want renewables, there are examples of whereby renewables, will work sometimes. And the idea of the batteries, so I'm not against, I don't think today's lithium batteries are very good for the environment at all. But I will say this, that when NASA sends probes to Mars, they use plutonium batteries, and these batteries will last for years, right? I mean, if you could somehow build a battery that you could put in a car that meant you didn't have to charge it for 50,000 or 100,000 kilometres, and it was this big, not this big, and you had to charge it every 400 kilometres for 10 hours, by all means, go ahead and do it. But anyway, that's off the point of farmers. But look, I don't know enough to know, but certainly lower the price of energy, lower the price of wages. That would be two ways to make us compete with China. But I love that idea because I'm from a sheep farm station myself, and I would love to see us make Australian wool products here in this country.